I've told some of the most unbelievable big buck stories ever recorded. Stories of deer struck by trains. Stories of bucks that learned how to live and thrive inside concrete jungles. Stories of world record whitetails that were lost, discarded, buried by controversy, and erased entirely by human pride. But this story is different. This story doesn't just twist, it wanders. It disappears, it resurfaces, and it sinks again. There is a reason that this deer is known as the Minnesota mystery buck. His antlers were thrown into a swamp, shot with BB guns by children, used as a tool to drag moss and muck from the bottom of a pond, left underwater for days at a time, thrown into the trash, hung in outhouses, bars, lodges, and forgotten corners of northern Minnesota. They were sold for thousands of dollars multiple times, and somewhere along the way, some of the tines were even shaved off. But there is another layer to this story, one that most people have never heard, the part that involves Al Capone. So what does Al Capone, the most infamous American gangster of the 20th century, have to do with a white-tailed deer killed by a poor Minnesota farmer? To understand that, we have to go back, not just to a different decade, but to a different world. You guys won't believe this one. Welcome to the Resurrection series. Northern Minnesota in 1956, it wasn't the America that we know today. There were no supermarkets glowing at every intersection, no freezers packed with choices, no backup plans. If you didn't have meat stored away, you didn't eat any meat. Deer weren't measured in inches, they were measured in meals, measured in survival. They were measured in whether winter was something that you endured or something that broke you. Near Sauk Center, Minnesota, on a small, struggling farm, lived a man named Sal Ahrens. Sal wasn't important. He wasn't known by the world. He wasn't trying to be anything more than what he was. He was poor, quiet, and humble. A bachelor who lived with his brother Ferdinand, a man altered by World War II in ways people didn't have words for back then. Men like Ferdinand came home, they went to work, and they carried things that they never spoke about. They worked the land together, they survived, and they kept their heads down and did what they had to do. And in that part of the world, Sal had a reputation. If someone needed food, Sal could get them a deer. Late one afternoon, just before the light began to fade, Sal and Ferdinand walked the edge of a clover field that bled into a swamp. There were no trail cams, no Onyx, no strategy, just a rifle and the quiet understanding that winter was always coming. And then they saw him. The buck stepped out, heavy and deliberate, carrying a body that seemed almost out of proportion. His rack was wide, thick, and burdened with mass in a way that didn't register as extraordinary. Not yet. Because to them, he was still just a deer. Sal raised the rifle, there was one shot, and the buck collapsed. And in that moment, what many now believe to be the greatest typical whitetail of all time lay dead in a Minnesota field, unnoticed, unmeasured, and unnamed. History should have ended there, but it didn't. The deer was too big to move whole, and so they quartered him. They had such an issue dragging the deer because his antlers were getting caught on everything. They packed the meat back to the farmhouse because that was what mattered. The antlers didn't. They cut off the head and threw it into the swamp. Not out of disrespect, not out of ignorance, out of practicality. Antlers didn't feed anyone, and they were just slowing down the process. And so the largest typical whitetail ever killed sat underwater hidden beneath dark swamp water and rotting vegetation unknown to the world that would one day change the whitetail world forever. Days later, someone asked Sal a question, maybe the most important question ever when it comes to resurrecting this deer. The man asked Sal, how big were the antlers? And so they went back to the swamp. They pulled the head from the swamp, lifting it through the mud and slime, the smell of decay clinging to it. And Sal's father thought the deer was special, and so he mounted it himself. Sal's father used rolled up linoleum for the neck and charcoal for the eyes. It wasn't beautiful, it was just functional. And the rack hung first in the outhouse. The children hated using the outhouse at night as the monster hung over them in the dark. And then it was taken down again. The mount was repeatedly thrown into a pond. It was used to drag moss and muck from the water, its antlers catching vegetation as it scraped the bottom. Sometimes it stayed down there for days, forgotten, submerged, and silent. And yet it always came back, again and again, as if it refused to stay buried. Oftentimes the rack would lay in the front yard as a dog would use it as a chew toy. Eventually, the rack ended up on the sun porch, and that's where the nephews found it. Children with BB guns, curiosity, and time to kill, and their imagination of being on an epic deer hunt. It was just kids being kids, pure innocence, because no one knew what Sal had killed. The rack moved again. It hung for more than a decade at the Palmer House Lodge above the men's restroom door. Later, it appeared at a bar at Beckley's Resort. It was always visible, always talked about, but never fully understood. At one point, it was even thrown into a dumpster. A local recognized it as Sal's deer and returned it back to Sal. No matter where it went, it always seemed to find its way back. Eventually, taxidermist Alex Martin convinced Sal to let him remount it properly. Sal agreed, and Alex pulled some basic measurements of the antlers. 7-inch bases, beams thick as his wrist. Martin measured the outside spread the only way he knew how, by laying it on its side. 31 inches, nearly a yard of antler, and still no official score. Rumors travel fast. They drift along, and eventually they reach the right ears. Dr. Charles Chuck Arnold was one of the most respected antler collectors in the country. Arnold was the owner of the famous Jordan buck and the owner of the Breen buck. If this rack belonged to the same conversation as those two deer, it was something special. Arnold flew to Minnesota to see the giant deer. Then again and again, he measured, he smiled, and he stopped talking. At the Minnesota Deer Classic, Arnold slid a single photo across the table. Men leaned in, eyes widened. By the time it returned back to Arnold's pocket, dozens of hunters were whispering the same thing. New world record. A month later, writer Mark Libera walked unannounced into Arnold's dental office. Arnold said very little about the deer, only that the deer might score over 211 inches, that it was a 12-pointer, and that it was hidden somewhere in Minnesota, and then the door closed. Arnold eventually bought the rack from Sal. Arnold paid cash for thousands of dollars, and Sal simply couldn't understand it. He told his friends that he thought the man was crazy. Sal bought a new pickup truck with the money and still couldn't believe it. Arnold reportedly sold the rack again quietly for tens of thousands more. No names, no confirmations, the buck disappeared. Then everything unraveled. A newspaper article, a phone call. Alex Martin, who mounted the deer for Sal, recognized the rack. It was Sal's deer. Rumors turned to accusations. The rumors were that the buck was shot before season, that the buck had altered antlers. Photos surfaced, and they indicated that two small abnormal points had been removed. Boone and Crockett rules disqualified the deer, and the blame landed on Sal. Sal didn't understand. "I killed a 14-pointer, he said. "Why would I cut it down to make it bigger?" That right there tells me that Sal was innocent. He had zero idea. Sal never saw the rack again, and unfortunately, he died confused and hurt. A man who only wanted to feed people, accused of cheating for a title that he never even chased. Just up the road from Sal's farm stood a cabin. Not just any cabin. During Prohibition, according to long-standing local stories, it belonged to the infamous gangster Al Capone. To understand why that cabin mattered, you have to understand who Capone was. In the 1920s and early 1930s, Al Capone wasn't just a gangster. He was the face of American organized crime. Chicago was his empire. Bootlegging, gambling, protection rackets, all of it flowed through Capone. But Prohibition created a problem. Alcohol had to be made somewhere, it had to be moved somehow, and it had to be hidden somewhere. And Chicago was far too noisy. Too many eyes, too many rivals, and too much heat. So Capone did what powerful men do when attention becomes dangerous. He spread out. Northern Minnesota, with its endless forests, scattered farms, frozen lakes, and miles of dirt roads, was the perfect place for him to disappear. Remote cabins weren't vacation homes, they were insurance. Places to lay low, places to move product, places where business could be handled quietly, far from city streets and newspaper headlines. And according to local accounts passed down for generations, one of those cabins sat just up the road from Sal's farm. And that matters because Sal wasn't a gangster. He wasn't a kingpin. He was a farmer trying to survive. And like many men in this region during Prohibition, Sal did what he had to do. This wasn't crime for power. This wasn't crime for ambition. This was crime for survival. The kind of work that fed families, paid debts, and stayed quiet, because staying quiet meant staying alive. And when you place the buck into that world, suddenly it makes sense. A deer that lived unnoticed, a rack that disappeared, resurfaced, and disappeared again, a set of antlers that never seemed to stay in one place for long. A legend passed hand to hand, not headline to headline. And so the questions arise. Did Sal ever carry those antlers down that dirt road? Did he step into that cabin with the rack? Did Al Capone ever see it? Did he hold the rack in his hands? Did he understand what it was, or did it mean nothing more than a curiosity in a strange time? Was Sal simply a local moonshiner who knew when to keep his mouth shut? Or was he more connected than anyone ever admitted? And here's the truth. None of this can be proven. There are no photographs, no records, no signed statements that survived the decades, only stories. Stories told quietly, told late at night, and stories that never quite died. And maybe that's the point. This buck didn't just grow in big woods. It didn't live its life in the open. It seemed to grow in the shadows. The Sal Ahrens buck still exists. Today, the rack is owned by Josh Duncan, co-founder of the OG Original General brand, along with antler collector Cody Idle. It's a 5x5 that would still be the world record today. A deer that survived swamps, dumpsters, BB guns, neglect, but couldn't survive human pride. The Sal Ahrens buck didn't fail the record book. People failed the buck. And maybe that's the real tragedy. As always in these episodes, it's hard to talk about resurrection without mentioning the resurrection of Jesus Christ, a man that was 100% man, but also 100% God. He took on the sin of the world. Every evil thing you've ever done was nailed to the cross. He was laid in a tomb, and hope seemed to be lost until 3 days later, that tomb was found empty. The resurrected Christ was seen by many, and death was defeated. The best news ever is that we too live again even after our earthly death if we put our faith into Jesus Christ. I urge you guys to do that today. Thank you for watching this episode of the Resurrection series. I would greatly appreciate it if you guys could subscribe to our channel, leave us a comment, and share our stories with others. It helps us out tremendously. You can show us additional support by purchasing our merch at thesearchoutdoors.com. Until next time, keep searching.